The morning it all began, sunlight dripped like honey over the vineyard, gilding the rows of grapes in gold. I remember thinking how ironic it was, how something so beautiful could grow in soil that hid so much rot. But then, that's the thing about poison. It doesn't always come in a bottle. Sometimes it's a man's smile across the breakfast table, the way his fingers linger just a second too long on your wrist, like he's checking for a pulse he hopes will stop. I was pruning the roses when Kevin's iPad buzzed on the patio table. He'd forgotten it, a rare slip for a man who treated secrecy like a religion. The screen lit up with a notification, Helena's name flashing like a warning. "Did you get the stuff? We can't wait much longer." I should have been shocked, maybe even dropped the shears, let them stab into the earth like a bad omen. But I didn't, because deep down, I'd always known. The late nights at the office that smelled like Helena's cloying jasmine perfume. The way he'd started suggesting I update my will. Just in case, babe. The way his eyes flickered to the wine cellar too often, like he was mentally measuring how much it would take to drown me. I opened the messages. And there it was. Their entire plot laid out in emojis and typos. Once she's gone, it's just us. The party's perfect. No one will suspect a toast. My fingers didn't shake, my breath didn't hitch. I just stood there, the sun warm on my back, and realised they think I'm the mark. The doomed wife in their little murder play. I took a photo of the messages, sent it to myself, deleted the trace. Then I placed the iPad back exactly as he'd left it, screen tilted toward the chair where he'd sit later, grinning like he hadn't just signed his own ruin. The rest of the morning passed in eerie normalcy. Kevin strolled out, pressed a kiss to my cheek, his lips dry, rehearsed. Big day, huh? 10 years. He didn't mean our marriage. He meant the countdown to my funeral. I smiled, poured his coffee black the way he liked it, and watched him gulp it down without a single thought that I might have laced it. See, Kevin? That's the difference between us. You announce your moves. I let you walk into them. By noon, I'd called my lawyer. By 3, the will was rewritten. And by dusk, as I stood at the edge of our vineyard watching the workers string up lights for our party, I realised something else. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure Kevin and Helena choked on their own happy ending. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in when you realise the person you've shared a bed with for years would rather see you in a casket than across a dinner table. It's not the loud, dramatic silence of movies. It's the quiet hum of the refrigerator at 3 a.m, the faint creak of floorboards under the weight of secrets. That's the silence I carried with me as I scrolled through Kevin's hidden world, each message a fresh cut disguised as a paper cut. The iPad was just the beginning. Once I knew where to look, the evidence unravelled like a poorly stitched seam. His business trips coincided with Helena's Instagram posts from boutique hotels, her coy captions, "Treat yourself," paired with diamond bracelets I certainly hadn't received. His late-night phone calls weren't to clients, but to a private investigator, asking questions about my routines, my habits, how long it would take for someone to notice if I didn't come home one night. But the real masterpiece, the draft all tucked in his desk drawer, so blatant it was almost insulting. In the event of Camilla's accidental death, the wording was clinical, as if he'd copied it from some true crime forum. And then the kicker, a life insurance policy I'd never signed, with my signature forged in shaky ink. He'd even gotten the date wrong. That's what stung the most, really. After 10 years, the bastard couldn't even remember our anniversary well enough to fake my handwriting properly. I traced the forged signature with my fingertip, the paper cool under my touch. Part of me wanted to storm into his study, slam it down in front of him, watch the colour drain from his face. But the smarter part, the part that had stopped crying over him months ago, whispered, "Wait, let him dig the grave deeper." So I did. I watched him hum in the shower, blissfully unaware his phone was synced to my laptop, every deleted text resurrecting itself in real time. I listened as he rehearsed his grieving widower speech to Helena over the phone. "It'll be quick, I promise," his voice dripping with faux sorrow. I even smiled when he brought home my favourite dessert, the chocolate torte I'd supposedly mentioned craving. I hadn't, his eyes lingering on my fork as I took the first bite. "Joke's on you, darling," I thought, swallowing the sweetness without flinching. Poison would have been kinder than what's coming. By the time the party invitations went out, I had everything I needed. Screenshots, voice recordings, even the receipt for the special champagne he'd ordered, the one that supposedly paired perfectly with shellfish. Funny, considering I was deathly allergic. The pieces were all there, laid out like a puzzle only I could solve. And the best part? Kevin still thought he was the player in this game. He had no idea he was the pawn. There's a special kind of arrogance in a man who thinks he's outsmarting you while you're watching him do it. Kevin had that arrogance in spades as he flitted around our anniversary party, refilling glasses with the practiced charm of a man who'd never been caught at anything. The way his fingers lingered on certain bottles. The way he made sure to pour my champagne last. Every move was a performance, and I was his captive audience. The guests arrived in waves, their laughter bubbling like the counterfeit joy in the room. They brought gifts wrapped in silver paper and hollow compliments about what a perfect couple we made. I accepted both with the same plastic smile, counting down the minutes until the real show began. Helena made her entrance in a dress the colour of fresh blood, her lips curved in a smirk she thought was subtle. She kissed Kevin's cheek a second too long, her fingers brushing his in a way that would have made me furious if I still cared. Instead, it just made the game more interesting. Kevin had planned every detail, the soft lighting to hide nervous sweat, the string quartet to drown out any unfortunate noises, even the guest list, carefully curated with people who'd vouch for his grief later. What he hadn't planned was me noticing how he kept glancing at the grandfather clock, counting down to my supposed last moments. Or how he'd positioned Helena near the emergency exit, ready to slip away when the chaos started. Most importantly, he hadn't planned on me knowing that the poison he'd chosen, aconite, according to his search history, takes exactly 12 minutes to show symptoms. I watched him hand me the glass, his pupils dilated with anticipation. "To us," he said, clinking his own drink against mine with a hollow ring. The champagne was sweeter than usual, with an undertone of something metallic. I let it touch my lips but didn't swallow, savouring the way his Adam's apple bobbed as he gulped his down, eager for the show to start. Then came my favourite part, the switch. A spilled napkin, a strategically placed waiter, and suddenly Helena's glass was in my hand, mine in hers. She didn't notice. Too busy preening, too busy imagining herself as the lady of the house. Kevin didn't notice either, too busy watching me for signs of distress to see his lover raise the wrong flute to her lips. The first sip was almost graceful. The second was when her fingers started twitching. By the third, her perfect facade cracked like thin ice, her gasp cutting through the quartet's waltz. I leaned in close as she clawed at her throat, whispering just loud enough for Kevin to hear, "Funny how the wrong drink can ruin your whole evening, isn't it?" His face, oh, his face, was worth every second of waiting. The dawning horror as he realised what I'd done, the way his eyes darted between me and Helena's convulsing body, the moment it hit him that he'd been outplayed at his own game. The guests started screaming, but all I could hear was the beautiful silence of his plan unravelling in real time. And the best part? This was only Act 1. The night Helena collapsed was when the real work began. While the paramedics wheeled her away and Kevin stood frozen in his own private hell, I was already 3 steps ahead. Revenge isn't about the moment of impact. It's about the careful architecture of consequences. And I was building a masterpiece. First came the digital trail, Kevin had been sloppy in his arrogance, leaving breadcrumbs even a child could follow. His business email account, the one he thought I didn't know about, contained receipts for wire transfers to Helena's account, each one time-stamped to coincide with my supposed illnesses. The week I'd been bedridden with food poisoning. That's when he'd bought the aconite from a dark web supplier, using our joint credit card like the entitled fool he was. I copied everything, sending duplicates to 3 separate encrypted drives. Evidence is only powerful when it can't disappear. Then there was the house. While Kevin paced the hospital waiting room, I combed through his study like an archaeologist uncovering a crime scene. The loose floorboard beneath his desk yielded gold, a burner phone still logged into his secret dating profiles, each message more damning than the last. But the real prize was tucked inside his golf bag, a key to a safety deposit box I'd never authorised. The next morning, dressed in widow's black just for the irony, I watched the bank manager's eyebrows climb as we inventoried its contents. $50,000 in cash, Helena's passport, and a one-way ticket to Bali, dated for tomorrow. My lawyer nearly choked on her coffee when I laid out the evidence. "This is premeditation with a bow on it," she murmured, already drafting the injunction to freeze all our assets. I added my own flourish, a new will, leaving everything to the Women's Crisis Network, with a very public press release scheduled for the day of Helena's discharge. Let Kevin explain to his gold-digging mistress why there wouldn't be a single cent left to steal. The final touch was the most delicious. Using Kevin's own fingerprint to unlock his phone, easy enough when he was passed out from stress, I transferred every penny from his hidden offshore accounts to repay the vineyard workers he'd been underpaying for years. The confirmation emails would hit his inbox right as the police came knocking. As I walked through the vineyard at dawn, the rising sun painted the grapes in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the city, Kevin was probably still babbling to detectives about how this was all a misunderstanding. But the security footage from our home, the same cameras he'd disabled for his private moments, was already being edited into a perfect narrative. They say chess is a game of strategy, but Kevin never realised we weren't playing chess. We were playing poker, and I'd been holding a royal flush since the day he first lied to me. Now it was time to make him go all in. The devil, they say, is in the details, and Kevin had made 3 fatal mistakes when selecting his murder weapon. First, he chose aconite, the so-called queen of poisons, with its telltale metallic aftertaste that any sommelier could identify. Second, he stored it in our wine cellar, forgetting I inventoried every bottle weekly. Third, and most unforgivably, he left his browser history open on our shared laptop like some amateur criminal. I discovered his research on a rainy Tuesday while he was working late. Another lie, as Helena's Instagram showed them sharing tiramisu at our favourite bistro. His search terms still hung in the air like gunsmoke. Untraceable poisons. How long before autopsy can't detect wolfsbane? Does champagne mask bitterness? The clinical detachment turned my stomach. He might as well have been comparing golf clubs. The bottle arrived disguised as a vintage Bordeaux, the label too perfect, the cork suspiciously pristine. I found it tucked behind a case of 89 Margot, his pathetic attempt at subtlety. When I pulled the stopper, the scent hit me. Not the earthy richness of aged wine, but something sharper, like copper pennies and wet stone. My hands didn't shake as I poured a thimbleful into a tasting glass. One drop on my tongue confirmed it. He'd used the Himalayan variety, with its distinct peppery finish. Amateur. Here's what Kevin never understood. Poison isn't just a substance, it's a story, and I knew exactly how to rewrite his. Over the next fortnight, I became a shadow in my own home. I watched him practice pouring with his left hand to avoid fingerprints, saw him test doses in the garden, noting how sparrows dropped mid-flight after sipping tainted bird bath water. observed him timing how long it took sugar to dissolve in chilled champagne. 37 seconds, just enough to hide the powder's faint blue tint. The night before the party, I replaced his aconite with finely ground gentian root. Same bitter profile, same solubility, utterly harmless. The real poison went into Helena's favourite lipstick, a custom blend that would leach through her skin over hours. Nothing fatal, just enough to make her muscles spasm at the worst possible moment. When Kevin handed me that flute at the party, his pupils dilated with anticipation. I almost pitied him. He was so proud of his plan, the way he'd positioned us beneath the chandelier for maximum visibility, how he'd coached Helena to feign concern when I fainted. He didn't notice when I switched the glasses, using a move I'd perfected during my smellery exams. Didn't see my smile as Helena reapplied her lipstick twice before toasting. The first tremor in her fingers came right on schedule. By the time she collapsed, the security cameras had captured everything. Kevin's panic, his fumbled attempts to dispose of the wrong glass, how he instinctively reached for Helena instead of me. As the ambulance wailed into the night, I pressed a handkerchief to my dry eyes and whispered the truth he'd learned too late. Darling, you should have poisoned the woman who knows wines, not the one who drinks them. The police would find his original toxin still sealed in our cellar, his browser history intact, his mistress babbling about lipstick burns. And me? I'd be the devastated wife who just happened to marry a monster, with all the evidence to prove it. The grand ballroom glittered like a gilded cage, every crystal chandelier and champagne flute positioned to perfection. Kevin had outdone himself. Imported orchids from Thailand, a 12-piece orchestra playing our wedding song, even the ice sculptures shaped like interlocking rings. The irony was almost poetic. He'd recreated our entire marriage in this single evening, beautiful to look at, hollow at its core. I arrived fashionably late, letting the whispers follow me through the crowd. Doesn't she look radiant? After 10 years, still so in love. If only they knew. My dress was my armour, ivory satin with a corset back tight enough to remind me to breathe, to stay present. The neckline dipped just low enough to show the emerald pendant Kevin had given me last Christmas, the same week he'd taken Helena to Paris. Every detail was calculated, from the way my heels clicked against marble to the exact shade of my lipstick. A deep crimson that wouldn't smudge no matter what horrors unfolded. Kevin found me near the champagne tower, his hand at the small of my back like he still had the right to touch me. You came, he murmured, as if I'd ever miss my own execution. His tuxedo smelled of Helena's perfume. J'adore, how original, with undertones of nervous sweat. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he poured 2 flutes from a special bottle he'd kept separate, his fingers trembling just enough to make the liquid shimmer. To us, he said, pressing the cool glass into my palm. The bubbles danced upward in lazy spirals, carrying the faintest metallic scent. I smiled, letting our glasses kiss with a crystalline ping that echoed through the room. Around us, guests raised their own drinks in tribute, oblivious to the murder happening in plain sight. Helena materialized on cue, in her scarlet sheath dress, her lips already stained from the poisoned lipstick she'd reapplied in the ladies' room. You look stunning, she lied, air-kissing my cheeks. I could taste the bitterness on her breath, gentian, root, and desperation. When she reached for a fresh flute from a passing tray, I accidentally knocked it from her grasp. Oh, darling, take mine, I insisted, pressing Kevin's specially prepared glass into her manicured hand. Our fingers brushed, her skin already clammy from the toxin seeping through her pores. You look parched. The orchestra swelled as Helena took her first sip, then her second. Kevin's gaze darted between us like a spectator at a tennis match, waiting for the wrong woman to fall. It took exactly 4 minutes. The time it takes to microwave popcorn, to boil an egg for a heart to stop beating, before her champagne flute shattered on the floor. Chaos erupted as Helena clutched her throat, her perfect face contorting. Guests screamed when she collapsed against the ice sculpture, sending wedding rings crashing down in a spray of diamond shards. Kevin's scream cut through the noise. "Call an ambulance!" But his feet stayed rooted to the spot, his horrified stare locked on the glass in my still steady hand. I met his gaze over Helena's convulsing body and took a slow, deliberate sip from my untouched drink. The champagne was exquisite, dry with hints of apple and betrayal. "Something wrong, darling?" I asked sweetly as the first police sirens wailed in the distance. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The cameras caught everything. How Kevin reached for Helena first, how he tried to kick the incriminating flute under a table, how his hand shook too badly to even dial 911. By the time paramedics arrived, I had already discreetly passed the master sommelier a note with the aconite bottle's location. As they wheeled Helena away, her once flawless skin now mottled purple, I adjusted my emerald pendant and turned to our guests with practiced tears. Who could have done this? The perfect victim. The perfect performance. The party was over, but the real show had just begun. The ballroom became a circus of flashing lights and horrified whispers, the kind of scene where everyone remembers where they were standing, but no one wants to admit they saw anything. Paramedics shoved through the crowd as Helena's convulsions sent a tray of canapes crashing to the floor, the sound of shattering porcelain mixing with her guttural choking. Kevin stood frozen, his face the colour of spoiled milk, watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. I made sure to position myself perfectly, close enough to appear concerned, far enough to avoid the mess. A single tear traced down my cheek, glycerin applied in the ladies' room, as I clutched a stranger's arm. "Do something!" My voice cracked just right, the perfect balance of shock and desperation. Around us, phones emerged like vultures circling Carry-On, capturing every second of Helena's demise. Kevin finally snapped into motion, but it was all wrong. Instead of rushing to his wife's side, he dropped to his knees beside Helena, cradling her head as foam bubbled at her lips. His hands fluttered uselessly, smearing her ruined lipstick across her chin like some grotesque clown makeup. The cameras ate it up. "It was her!" he suddenly roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. The room gasped in unison. "She switched the glasses!" I let my mouth fall open in perfect, wounded disbelief. "Kevin, how could you?" My whisper carried across the sudden silence. Then, with theatrical hesitation, I reached into my clutch and produced his iPad. The screen glowed with his damning messages to Helena, projected for all to see by the event photographer's live feed. The room erupted. His mother fainted dramatically into a waiter's arms. The district attorney's wife made the sign of the cross. And Kevin? He did the most predictable thing possible. He lunged for the device. That's when Detective Ruiz stepped from the shadows, intercepting him with a firm hand to the chest. "Mr. Delacroix, I think you should sit down." The detective's calm voice cut through the hysteria like a scalpel. "We have some questions about your recent purchase of... what was it? Aconite Napellus?" Kevin's face went slack. He hadn't noticed the plainclothes officers stationed by every exit, hadn't realised the wait staff included forensic specialists bagging glassware. His gaze darted to the champagne tower, where a crime scene tech was already dusting the special bottle for prints. Helena's gurney wheels squeaked as they rolled past, her once elegant limbs now strapped down with restraints. She... Kevin stammered, sweat soaking through his designer shirt. "Attempted murder carries a 20-year sentence," Ruiz continued conversationally. "But since your mistress just implicated you in conspiracy from the ambulance, well..." The handcuffs clicked with finality. I waited until they'd nearly dragged him out before speaking. Wait. The crowd parted as I approached my husband, his perfect hair now hanging in greasy strands. Plucking the emerald pendant from my neck, I dropped it into his shackled hands. You'll need something to remember me by. The cameras caught his sob as they shoved him into the squad car, his reflection warped in the rain-slicked windows. Inside, the orchestra had inexplicably started playing I Will Survive. Some tragedies write themselves. Hospitals have their own particular scent, antiseptic and false hope, with undertones of human desperation. The ICU waiting room reeked of it as I took my carefully chosen seat between Kevin's sobbing mother and Helena's tight-lipped plastic surgeon. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps, casting everyone in the sickly pallor of impending doom. I'd dressed for the occasion, a modest black sweater set, pearl earrings, no makeup except for the faint purple shadows I'd accentuated beneath my eyes. The picture of exhausted devotion. My hand stayed perfectly steady as I flipped through a months-old People magazine, pausing occasionally to dab at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Every sniffle, every shaky breath was measured for maximum effect. Kevin's lawyer arrived first, smelling of bourbon and panic. He pulled me aside, his meaty fingers leaving damp prints on my sleeve. Camilla, be reasonable. This was clearly a terrible accident. His breath hit my cheek like a physical blow. Kevin would never... Would never what? I interrupted, just loud enough for the nearby reporters to perk up. Never buy wolfsbane from a dark web dealer, never rewrite my will, never fuck my best friend in our bed. I let my voice crack on the last word, a masterclass in controlled devastation. The lawyer recoiled as if I'd struck him. Behind us, a nurse dropped a metal tray with a satisfying clatter. Helena's doctor emerged then, his scrub stained with something yellowish. She'll live, he announced, then hesitated, though the nerve damage is extensive. Kevin's mother wailed like a banshee. I pressed a hand to my mouth, not to stifle grief, but to hide a smile. The good doctor didn't mention how the toxins had ravaged Helena's facial nerves, how her once perfect smile now twisted into a permanent sneer. Some things are better seen than said. They let me visit her. The sight of Helena propped up in that sterile bed was almost artistic. Her Botox-paralysed forehead unable to furrow in rage, her collagen-swollen lips drooping on one side. The heart monitor beeped erratically as I leaned close enough to smell the fear beneath her hospital-grade lotion. You should have researched aconite more thoroughly, I murmured, adjusting her IV line with mock tenderness. It attacks the nervous system first. Fitting, don't you think? Her remaining functional eye widened when I placed a familiar lipstick tube on her bedside table, the same shade she'd reapplied at the party. A souvenir, I explained sweetly. Though I hear you'll be sticking to balm from now on. The door burst open as Kevin staggered in, cuffs exchanged for an ankle monitor, his once impeccable hair now greasy and unkempt. Baby, I can explain, he began, reaching for Helena's limp hand. I exited just as her first coherent word since the poisoning echoed down the hallway. Coward. Outside, reporters swarmed like piranhas. I paused on the steps, letting the cameras capture my single perfect tear in the afternoon light. I just hope, I whispered into the microphones, that the woman who destroyed my marriage makes a full recovery. The click of shutters sounded like applause. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and schadenfreude. Kevin shuffled in, wearing a suit that suddenly looked 3 sizes too big, his cuffed hands clutching a legal pad filled with desperate scribbles. His lawyer kept mopping his brow with a handkerchief that had clearly seen better days, much like his client. The evidence unfolded like a particularly satisfying noir film. Security footage showed Kevin tampering with the champagne flute. His own search history detailed his poison research. The pièce de résistance? A voicemail to Helena. Just make sure she drinks first. The jury's collective gasp was practically orchestral. I sat perfectly still in the front row, clad in demure navy. The press called it the colour of quiet strength, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes. When the prosecutor played the 911 call, Kevin screaming, "It was supposed to be her," I allowed one perfectly timed tear to escape. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Guilty on all counts. Kevin turned to me wild-eyed as they led him away. "You set me up." I mouthed 3 words back. "Prove it." Outside, cameras flashed as I read a prepared statement about closing this painful chapter. The real victory came hours later when the judge approved the asset freeze. Every last cent of our money, now mine alone. As Kevin's prison bus pulled away, I toasted with a glass of perfectly safe champagne. The bubbles tasted like justice. 6 months after the trial, I saw her again, across the crowded interior of a dingy downtown cafe that smelled of burnt coffee and regret. The once vibrant socialite had been reduced to a shadow in a hooded sweatshirt, her face half hidden behind oversized sunglasses, even on this cloudy afternoon. The poison had left its marks in ways no plastic surgeon could fix, the slight droop of her left eyelid that gave her a permanently sleepy expression, the way her top lip curled unnaturally when she sipped her tea, the tremor in her once elegant fingers that made the cup rattle against its saucer. I watched from my corner booth as she fumbled with a stack of medical bills, her bitten-down nails catching on the envelopes. The diamond bracelet Kevin had given her, the one she'd flaunted all over Instagram, was conspicuously absent. In its place was a hospital wristband, the paper frayed at the edges but still legible. Neurology ward, room 814. She didn't notice me until I slid into the seat across from her. Up close, the damage was even more exquisite. The aconite had ravaged her nerve endings, leaving one side of her face eerily smooth while the other twitched involuntarily. Her once luxurious hair hung limp, its blonde dulled to the colour of dishwater. "Still taking your tea with 2 sugars?" I asked, pushing the porcelain sugar bowl towards her. My voice was light, conversational, as if we were back at one of our old brunches. Her good eye widened, the other remained half-lidded, frozen in a grotesque wink. "You..." The word came out slurred, like her tongue was too thick for her mouth. "Me," I agreed pleasantly. I reached into my bag and placed a small velvet box between us. Inside rested the emerald pendant Kevin had given me, the same one I'd tossed to him in handcuffs. "I thought you should have this. After all, you paid for it in the end." Her trembling hand knocked over the sugar bowl, granules scattered across the table like tiny shards of glass. "Bitch!" she spat, the insult mangled by her uneven lips. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a whisper only she could hear. "The doctors didn't tell you everything, did they? Aconite's effects are cumulative. That tremor in your hands? It'll get worse. The facial paralysis? Only about 30% of patients regain full control." I tapped the medical bills with one manicured nail. "And these? They never stop coming." A waitress approached, eyeing Helena's distress with concern. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," I said brightly, standing to leave. I dropped a $100 bill on the table, enough to cover her tea and the broken sugar bowl. "Keep the change." Outside, the afternoon sun felt warm on my skin. Behind me, I heard the crash of china as Helena swept the emerald pendant onto the floor. The sound was almost as satisfying as the notification that chimed on my phone moments later, a news alert about Kevin's failed appeal. Some people might call this cruel. I prefer to think of it as poetic symmetry. After all, they'd planned to take everything from me. Now they had nothing but each other, broken, penniless, and painfully aware of exactly how they got there. And me? I had everything, including front row seats to their suffering. Prison orange did nothing for Kevin's complexion. I watched through the bulletproof visitation glass as he shuffled into the booth, his once confident swagger reduced to the hunched posture of a man who'd learned too late that his charm meant nothing behind bars. The designer stubble he'd always carefully maintained had grown into an unkempt beard, streaked with premature grey. His hands, the same ones that had poured poisoned champagne with such precision, now bore the nicks and calluses of a man doing hard labour in the prison laundry. "You look like hell," I said, not bothering to hide my smile. He pressed a palm against the glass like some tragic movie cliché. "Camilla, please, you have to help me." His voice had lost its polished cadence, replaced by the rasp of someone who'd spent months screaming into his pillow. "They moved me to general population last week. Do you know what happens to guys like me in there?" I did, actually. My private investigator's reports made for fascinating bedtime reading. How Kevin's cellmate had stolen his commissary privileges, how he'd traded his gold watch for protection that never came, how he'd gotten demoted from library duty after getting caught trying to forge legal documents. "Funny," I mused, tapping a fingernail against the glass. "You used to complain our house was too cold. Now I hear you sleep under 3 scratchy wool blankets." His bloodshot eyes darted around the visitation room before lowering to a whisper. "I'll sign anything. The divorce papers, the asset forfeiture. Just get me out of here." I reached into my Birkin and slid a photograph through the metal tray. A glossy shot of Helena mid-sneeze at her latest court appearance, her paralysed face frozen in a grotesque rictus. "She blames you, says you botched the dosage." Kevin's breath fogged the glass as he slumped forward. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "No," I agreed, standing to leave. "You were supposed to inherit millions. She was supposed to be the beautiful new Mrs. Delacroix. And I adjusted my diamond tennis bracelet, the one he'd bought Helena but that now adorned my wrist. I was supposed to be dead." The guard coughed pointedly. As I turned to go, Kevin suddenly slammed both hands against the partition. "You set me up. That wasn't even real aconite." I paused at the door, letting him savour the truth he'd never prove. "Darling," I purred, "if you'd paid attention during our wine tastings, you'd know I always preferred a full-bodied revenge." Outside, the winter air smelled crisp and clean. My driver held open the door of the Bentley, the same one Kevin had picked out, though he'd never ride in it again. As we pulled away from the prison gates, my phone buzzed with an alert, the final transfer of his remaining offshore accounts into my foundation for abused women. Some might say I'd taken everything from him, but that wasn't quite true. I'd left him with exactly what he deserved, a lifetime to regret crossing me. Spring came early to the vineyard that year. I stood on the terrace of the renovated estate, watching the first buds unfurl on the grapevines, their tender leaves gilded by the morning sun. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings, a far cry from the stale deceit that had clung to these walls for years. Below me, workers moved through the rows with pruning shears, their laughter carrying on the breeze. They'd all gotten raises, of course. Loyalty should be rewarded. The grand reopening party was in full swing behind me, not some stuffy corporate event, but a vibrant gathering of the women's shelter residents, who now called the guest cottages home. Children darted between tables laden with canapés, their sticky fingers grabbing at cupcakes iced in violet, the official colour of domestic violence awareness. The irony wasn't lost on me. A server approached with a champagne flute, the same vintage Kevin had once tried to kill me with, now rebranded under my label. Veuve Camilla. The irony fizzed on my tongue as I took the first sip. Perfection. "To new beginnings," said the shelter director, clinking her glass against mine. "To justice," I corrected softly, watching the bubbles rise. My phone buzzed with the weekly update I still requested, though I hardly needed the validation. Kevin had been denied parole again. Helena's latest facial reconstruction surgery had failed. The tell-all book she'd tried to publish had been sued into oblivion by my legal team. Small satisfactions, but satisfying nonetheless. A little girl tugged at my skirt, her cheeks dusted with frosting. "Miss Camilla, the butterflies are here." I let her lead me to the newly installed conservatory, where hundreds of monarchs fluttered beneath the glass ceiling, a sanctuary for creatures who'd undergone their own transformations. One landed on my outstretched finger, its wings trembling with newfound freedom. "It's beautiful," breathed the child. "It's survival," I corrected, though she wouldn't understand. Not yet. Later, when the stars pricked through the twilight and the last guests had gone, I poured myself a final glass in the study where Kevin had once plotted my demise. His antique desk now held ledgers for the foundation. The hidden safe where he'd kept poison receipts stored scholarship applications. Every corner of this house had been reclaimed, repurposed, redeemed. The news played quietly on the television, a recap of my recent donation to the Forensic Toxicology Lab. The reporter called me Philanthropist of the Year. Kevin's mother, interviewed outside the country club she could no longer afford, spat that I was a monster in designer clothing. I toasted them both. Some women inherit diamonds. Some get houses. I was left with something far more valuable, the crystalline knowledge that every single person who'd wronged me was living a lesser life while mine kept improving. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty halls. Somewhere out there, a prison cell light flickered over a man who'd gambled everything and lost. A hospital monitor beeped beside a woman who'd traded beauty for greed. And here, the champagne never stopped flowing.